The problem with it, Yogi, is there's nothing better in the world than coaching. So when you say to someone, "Do you wish you were still coaching?" It's an experience that you can't duplicate. You're with young people. You're on campus, and these athletes nowadays, I defend them to the hilt because all the people my age, oh, they're getting paid now. Oh, they can transfer and all this stuff. These are the most highly motivated, most dedicated. They study the game year round.
Welcome back, or welcome to Y Option. I'm your host, Yogi Roth, always alongside producer and co-founder Jim Thornby. There is one game remaining. It's the national title. It's Notre Dame. It's Ohio State. So today's guest, presented, of course, by our founding partner 76, is the coach and probably the perfect guy, Jim, to have this conversation. Gerry DiNardo, All-American national championship player at Notre Dame. And, of course, a Big Ten Network analyst since day one, with the doors open at the Big Ten Network. So he knows both programs intimately well on a really unique level. He's become a dear friend. Excited to have him come on the show. With that, how is life? How are you after the semifinals in advance of the big one?
Doing good. And it was cool. And I'll just tease the stuff with Coach DiNardo coming up because I thought it was really cool. This was, after years of hearing stuff from him, from our friends that used to work at the Big Ten Network back in the day and stuff like that, to now, this was my first real interaction with Coach DiNardo. So he lived up to the billing. I'll just say that. And then I'll just tease. He'll mention about how the Ohio State Notre Dame thing personally impacts him. So it's a really fun conversation. And I'll just tell you, it gets better and better as the interview goes along. Like, he really starts amping it up there at the end. It was great stuff.
Yeah, a lot of passion. You'll see it on all of our social channels at Y Option. Make sure you're following us along on YouTube as well. All the links are at yoption.com. Let's just start with reality. And reality is, today I sit here in Southern California, and today is Tuesday morning as we record this. Last night was a big night in Southern California. The rest of today and tomorrow will be big regarding the winds and the fires that I'm sure you've heard about wherever you reside. To all the people that have reached out to us and myself, thank you. We appreciate it. Try to get back to everybody. Also, some of our dear friends and past visitors and I guess guests on this show have been really impacted. Rhett Lewis being one. Make sure you check out where he and his family are on social media. They evacuated, but they are okay as of now. So let's hope and pray that we just remain all right. Now, with that said, Jim, we wrote about it in our latest newsletter where I kind of said where my head was at the CFP, but my heart was always here. It's such a weird week, man. Like, I left last Tuesday, and as we took off, it was so windy, and we've all been on flights like that where you're like, whoa, like you kind of grab it. Like, this is a different different jolt than sometimes you feel when you're flying amid high winds. By the time I landed in Dallas for the Cotton Bowl, the fires had begun. And by the time I woke up the next morning, one of our dearest friends and their two children, they were sending us pictures of their home, which is no longer standing. And that really began the harsh reality of what has gone on here in Los Angeles. And it was really unique, man, because here I am, like, calling a game or broadcasting and pregame showing and interviewing, and it was amazing, right? It's Chip Kelly, it's Emeka Buka, it's all the players, all the things. And at the same time, like, texting my wife or looking up at, one of the apps to see where the fire is. And on Friday night, the night of the game, was when, at least personally, it became like the closest to where, my wife was like, all right, am I going to have to get us up out of here? Pales in comparison to people who've lost everything. But point being, it was just unique. It was really weird because all of us in LA were going through it, and you live in the Bay Area and have empathy, of course. You spent and used to live down here. But the rest of the country had great empathy for it, but it weren't living it. So it was different than like 2020. And when I landed and drove around LA, it felt like 2020 here. Like, it's desolate, man. Like, you can't get on the 101. Like, you can't drive on certain roads. And in navigating that, even with our own kids, it was just something that I had never done. And we've always said here, hey, we're going to talk about college football through the lens of the West Coast. Well, there's a lot that's going on through the lens of the West Coast right now. And even last night at dinner, Jim, it was like, hey, imagine if you had to be relocated due to the fires. Imagine if you had to evacuate. Imagine if you lost your home. Imagine if you lost your dog. Imagine if you lost a loved one. And it was this conversation with our children of like, hey, like perspective is a really powerful word. And having empathy and respect and regard for people that are navigating something needs to be paramount, whether you're at school or for us in our profession. And it was just like, it was hopefully one of experiences for me in my life. So I just want to kind of share that off the top. We, of course, will continue to share resources and thoughts at Y Option for anybody that's going through it. And I know, Jim, you spent time in LA and have roots here to a degree. Like, what was your experience as you're also working and trying to make sure that all the things in your day job were up to speed, but also knowing that so many people that I'd imagine were dramatically impacted?
Yeah, I mean, I lived down there for 9 years in the greater Los Angeles area for 9 years, from '99 to '08, and a lot of former coworkers and friends that either I had a bunch of them that had to evacuate. I've had a handful of them that either their house or their family's parents' house completely burned down. People that lived in Palisades or Malibu. So you're just trying to even strike that balance, because you're kind of removed from it, 5 hours north of there. And how do you reach out to the people where you feel like you're still being helpful, and not like, because if you're really in that mix, like, you got a billion things going on, and like, how are you trying to like just check in on people without like, you're almost like checking on people that are on the fringes, because if you know that they're really in the thing, like, I'm sure that they appreciate the reaching out, but like, they've got a billion things on their mind, more so than that. So it's really just trying to find the balance on all of that.
Yeah, I'm on this one thread of people in LA that love college football, and they all live in Brentwood or the Palisades or one of the canyons that were impacted. So, you can imagine what it was like. How you doing? Okay, one evacuated. How the other one evacuated? You're just checking in on them. And then at one point, one of them said, hey, appreciate the concern, but like, what's up with that fourth down call? So it was like they still wanted to talk about football. And we will never try to state that we are going to be something that can take your mind off of something that's really dramatically impacting your life. But if you do need college football and you do want to take through the lens of the West, we'll continue to show up for you. So with that said, Jim, let's transition to the two games that did exist. One in Miami on a Thursday, one in Dallas on a Friday. Dallas was weird because it was like snowing everywhere, and it was like, what is happening on the planet? My colleagues like Gerry DiNardo and company, they're in Miami. I'm not saying they're sipping Mai Tais on the beach, but there's a version of that I may or may not have seen a picture of. What do you think when you look at the semis? What do you think it says about the format? Because what do we have, 7v8 in the national championship? You want to go by like
just like everyone thought it was going to be in August, 7 versus 8.
Right. Do you think anybody in August thought like
no chance
1, 2, 3, or 4 would be not Ohio State or Notre Dame too? Like, I don't think people even understood what would happen and how the seeding would play out in the way that it did.
And I want to say, of course not. To an extent, like, how would anyone really know how this is going to play out? And everybody wants the Monday morning quarterback, the format, and be like, oh, they should have, like, there's no way anybody would have guessed that this is how this would have all played out. That the 4 teams that all had byes all lost the next week. People will say, oh yeah, of course they would. Like, no, you didn't know that. Like, I didn't hear that, you saying that in August. The funny thing is, like, I feel like the one criticism that the playoff got, especially in the first round and a little bit less in the quarters, were that the games were not very good. But the semis, I mean, those games were phenomenal. Like, those were 2 great college football games. Now, are those the 4 best teams in the country? I don't know, maybe. but that's how these things work. I mean, that's how when you expand out a tournament, you have that opportunity for teams to kind of based on matchup or based on whatever. Um, but I think that the quality if the semis would have been blowouts like we've seen in the semis when it was a 4-team tournament, then maybe people would be like, I don't know. But I think this almost kind of validated, like, hey, we've kind of whittled this down, and we got I don't know if it's the best 4 teams, but the right 4 teams, at least as far as matchup wise, that put together 2 really good games.
Yeah, they were big time games.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think we'll get it again in the title. I just from being there and being around, I'll just pivot to being in Dallas and watching this game shake out with Texas 200 miles away. And it was so cool to see Sark, like caught each other's eye in the press conference, got to catch up a little bit afterwards. I went over to the team hotel and hung out with our good friends, Jared Blank and company. It was just really cool. And then to watch Ohio State and that brand, and we'll talk about it with Gerry DiNardo, our guest today, presented by our founding partner 76. He talks about like the ride that they've been on ever since Michigan. And you could argue if you don't lose to Michigan, maybe you're not playing for a national championship, because something changed with how this team has performed throughout the entirety of the regular season, and now of course the postseason. And I just thought, like, this is going to be a record number of people who watched it, and it wasn't. Like, the numbers were down. Like, it blew, and maybe that's a Thursday night thing, but I was like, the sport is as popular as it's ever been. Like, I thought this was going to be like 25 million people tuned in, because to your point, the games were epic. Like, the finishes had everything you can dream of. I wonder if you have like a theory on that with all of your expertise in the media.
It's funny because I think, I mentioned this on our last show, that there didn't seem like there was the buzz heading into those games that there had been. And I don't know if that's, the overlap with the NFL playoffs and, everything else that was going on, and then just everything else that is going on in the world. I mean, obviously,
Fair.
Just in Los Angeles alone, how many people are really locked into that, or more locked into what's going on in the news. So I think that could be a portion of it. I didn't like go into the nitty gritty of all the numbers on that, but I think, to me, it didn't seem like there was the same buzz going into that, which is ironic because those games were phenomenal. Whereas I think it's going to be interesting to see how the drumbeat for this national title game happens as we get closer, as the teams arrive in Atlanta, and then that starts to really amp stuff up from there.
Yeah, I think that this year, I think more than 2 fan bases are going to care. I think there is something to like football fatigue in college. Like, we're all programmed, at least institutionally our age demo, January 1 is like the epicenter, right? And like, there's been many times in my career where like a team in the Pac-12 didn't make it after January 1 that I went on vacation. And I would like put the game on in Iceland or in Europe or like wherever I was going, because it was like, there's 4 teams left. There's 2 teams left. Like, I hope Clemson or Alabama or whatever, wins, or it's a good game. But like, you don't really care as much as if you do if you're, really tracking a team. I am this year. So I want to make sure I'm not biased. But I think that there is something where like the collective college football world, I think, will lean into Notre Dame and Ohio State in a way we haven't seen in a championship. And there was an article a couple of days ago in The Athletic of like the top 12 CFP games in history. And I think, as you and I were kind of talking about this, like the 2 games over the weekend might have just jumped a lot of them, because they were
100%.
Right. They were epic games. I mean, I'm watching Penn State and I'm thinking, okay, they're going to roll in the beginning of this game. And then it's challenging play after challenging play. And then you go to the end of the game, and here's Drew Aller and Penn State. And you know me, I'm aggressive by nature. They decide to go for it instead of play for overtime. And Drew Aller was having, a really challenging night at quarterback, and he throws a horrible interception, trying to get the ball to number 3 and maybe trying to dirt it, is what he said after the game. No reason to not believe what he's said after the game, but God, it just looked like he was just trying so hard to make up for negative plays. There's a phrase at quarterback play that I use all the time in broadcasting. It's like, you just got to try easy. You got to try easy, right? You got to check it down. I am charting in the game I covered, Texas, Ohio State, and I'm charting the checkdowns from Will Howard, because Texas is going to play double coverage to Jeremiah Smith, a little extra of attention to Emeka Ibuka, try to force him to throw it to Carnell Tate, the third receiver, and he's just checking it down for the most part, right? Forced one really bad pick where I think like every quarterback, to me, to be a total nerd, if you chart interceptions, and I've done this study many times, most are to the quarterback's left. It's that weak side hook defender. So it's a defensive lineman dropping. It's a linebacker. You think he's blitzing, but he drops late. And you think you got a curl route, or you got a dig route, or you got a post route. And all of a sudden, the guy pops up and makes a pick. That's what happened to Will Howard against Texas. So overall, like, it was fascinating. I think what I'll remember most, and I'm curious for you, what I'll remember most easily is Jack Sawyer. Easily. I got to know him well over their run, having covered this team and interviewed him many times, got him on the field right after the game. I was standing in the end zone because they let the media down 5 minutes before the game ends. And I'm watching. I think I sent you the video. We probably posted it on our YouTube channel of like real live, like, oh my God, it's going to sack. This is first and goal with the 1. You're thinking Texas is easily going to tie this thing up, and away we go in overtime. And not only is it sack, college fumble, but then to the house for the guy who came back, who grew up within a stone's throw at Pickering High School of Jake Budd, a one-time guest here at Y Option, colleague at Big Ten. Like, it was storybook. And I don't think of many like defensive plays in the history of my life that I'm like, that play in that game.
Ready, set, dream cabin nestled in the woods. Just 4 hours to go. New job halfway across the country. Butterflies before a first date. Wherever you go, 76 fuels all the ways you go.
Yeah, especially on this level of college football. Like, I kind of went back and I was looking through all like the stories about each of the CFP games, and trying to find like a defensive play that was this big. That was this big. You look at last year's Sugar Bowl with Elijah Jackson knocking down the pass at the end of the game, which amazing, but I not the same. It's not the same. Or you look at Jalen Milroe getting stuffed in the Rose Bowl against Michigan.
Yeah,
again, it's a huge play, but it's not the same. I think the closest that I could find was the 2022 title game when Keely Ringo had the pick six on Bryce Young with 54 seconds left. So that's in the national title game. So like that's on that same level. But it's funny because I'm going to go back to what you said before about like the hangover of college football when your team exists. I'm sure I did, but I don't remember. I don't like viscerally remember that play of watching that game because at that point, the rooting interest is not there. So like I almost feel like you do kind of shut it down. Once we were at the Pac-12 for 12 years. Once we were not in it, or the years that we didn't even make it to the playoffs, like it's kind of like, like, okay, I'm good. I'm ready to move on to the next thing, start preparing for next year. So yeah, this will be, as far as big moments, and especially on the defensive side, as big as I can remember in college football.
Yeah, he's cemented a legacy in a big way and became, I don't want to go over the top, but like, did he become a household name? Like, he might have.
Yeah, I mean, he's got the name. Like Jack
Yeah.
Sawyer is like such a.
Like, you have to play in the Midwest. Like, you're Jack Sawyer. Like, you have to be a badass defensive lineman. Okay, so I want to give a shout out to the Cotton Bowl. They love Jim Thornby, so I was almost like nauseated.
It goes both ways.
Oh my! Yeah, no, I was so proud. It was great, man. They love you and the work that you do, and it's fun just loving on you all week long. I think there's something cool about what college is doing that I think the NFL could take. Okay, ride with me on this. Media days. So the way that it works in the CFP is that for the first round, and call it like the semifinal round or the third round, if you will, those are like abbreviated media days. You come in 2 days before the game, you do some media with TV and local media or national media, whatever. Your coaches have a press conference the day before the game, and then you have the game. Call it quarterfinals or round 2 and round 4, or the quarterfinals and the champ game. It's going to be more of a traditional media environment where you have like a media day. Go back and look at our YouTube channel. You'll see me on the set with Ashley Adamson at a traditional media day where the entire team is available. It's just way more access. Well, I think there's a lot of dialogue of like, why are we having all these media days? Like, how many times can you retell the Ohio State story? And I think there's something to that. And it was really cool being at the Cotton Bowl and talking to representatives from both teams, because both at Ohio State and Texas, these are like legendary SIDs, sports information directors, people running their media. I mean, like truly like Tim Tessalone level of just rock stars. And I think everybody's saying like, why are people going to come and cover this again? Like, how many times can you tell the Michigan, the Tennessee, the Oregon? Like, how many times can you tell the story? Because there is a lot of access in this era, and especially in the playoff era, that is pretty much owned and operated by the college football playoff. Well, I love the fact that they did it. And I say this because, and Coach DiNardo and I will talk about this here coming up shortly in our interview, is that the stories in college football, they're so plentiful. Like, Jack Sawyer isn't just the kid from Pickerington, Ohio, who grew up wanting to go to Ohio State. Like, he's got a lot of layers to him. Emeka Egbuka isn't just the kid who came out of Seattle that wanted to really develop it wide out at Ohio State. Like, he's got layers to him. And Jim, it was really fun for me covering Ohio State, from being there in camp and doing these interviews with Quinshon Junkins and company and Ryan Day and Chip Kelly, to then doing them pre-Rose Bowl, post-Rose Bowl, pre-Cotton Bowl, post-Cotton Bowl. And now they'll happen again here before the national championship game. And I just think it was really a cool opportunity to take the helmet off. Right? That's what we pride ourselves on doing here. And I would love to see the NFL adopt a certain model, whether that's for like the AFC and NFC championship games. Like, you're not going to do it every round, but I think there's something to getting to know people and elevating their stories. And I think even walking into it, the SIDs, probably not necessarily at Texas because it was basically a home game, but I would bet for Penn State, for Notre Dame, for Ohio State, it was like, God, is our local media going to fly in 2 days early to cover us?
Because it's
Jim,
expensive.
it was rocking. I mean, it's 6 deep. Like, you barely can get an interview. Like, you're trying to get sound. Like, it was awesome. So shout out to the Cotton Bowl and the CFP for staying strong on that. Shout out to the players for being so vulnerable. And we heard so many stories from different. Cody Simon was like, I still haven't played my best game. And I'm like, bro, you're just the Rose Bowl defensive MVP and had 11 tackles the week before against Tennessee. What is your best game? Like, they're giving you storylines and allowing you to know them. And then also a shout out to the media for going there and covering it. I tell this to locker rooms every offseason, and I'll do it again starting in February when I kind of do my tour, Jim, of nobody's out to get you. The media wants you to win, especially if they're covering you, because that means more people read their stuff, click on their stuff. The more people that do that, the more they get paid. So the more stories you tell, the better it is. And the maturity, I will say this about Ohio State now, the maturity of their players has blown me away. For being a $20 million roster, reportedly, right? For being like a bunch of quote unquote guys that should be in the NFL that easily could think that it's a better way to say like their blank doesn't stink. Like, to basically think that like they're all, high and mighty and they don't need to do these, which a lot of teams, some teams have done. Some players have done. I wouldn't recommend it. They have been so impressive. So impressive. So I just want to say that like NFL, adopt that model, and college, keep going with this model.
Yeah, well, what's really cool about that, because if you think about now living in a post-COVID life, and you think about school beat writers, like back in the day, the school beat writers had way more access to these players, all season long. And now, like, for reasons that are definitely made sense at the time, maybe not as much now, but even now there's probably as much of a manpower and every other reason for it. They don't have that same access. And so what I really like about these media days, those kind of media days, like I think back when we went to the Sugar Bowl, the year before when it was Washington, Texas, and this is your chance. Yeah, like that was your chance to talk to Michael Penix Jr. and Roma Dunze and stuff like that. But it's also a chance to get to know all the other guys because they're all there. Those kind of media days, all the players are there. So this is a chance to get to know those guys, the future of these programs that maybe aren't playing right now. Like I can, it was obviously a big deal at the time, and it was pretty funny being there and watching when Texas had their availability then, and Quinn Ewers is sitting at his podium, and Arch Manning is just in the back, on the benches, and there's a ginormous crowd around Arch Manning and almost nobody around Quinn, because even the Texas media at least had gotten to talk to Quinn throughout the season. They hadn't gotten to talk to Arch. So this was like the time for that. So it's such a great opportunity to get to know those other guys, because sometimes they're just a great personality that might not even really play that much, or like I said, it's the backup behind the star who will be the star the next year, and getting to know him and getting to all building those relationships and stuff like that. So 100% agree. Like, those things are so cool. I know they're not easy, the logistics for everyone to put all those stuff. Like, I can think back to running the Pac-12 media days in the summers, and like just the amount of planning that goes into those events and the amount of execution that has to happen so that everybody winds up at the right place at the right time and everything like that. It's insane. But kudos, like to your point, kudos for them to keep doing that. Hopefully we get to see more and more of that, even though like I could get it for the head coach and the one or two star players from the team. It could probably start to feel a little monotonous after a few of those.
No doubt. Well, to the star player, like, ring it out is what I would say. Like Will Howard, Riley Leonard, like, you're going to get your shot in an NFL camp, but people aren't going to be clamoring to tell your story. So I always say, like, hey, if you have a story to tell, this is your platform. This is your stage. So hopefully they continue to do that. Also, Cotton Bowl, great pub crawl. Just give you that quick shout out as well. Ashley, Adamson, myself, and our entire Big Ten crew had an absolute blast with that. Okay, so let's get to a man who, how do I transition this? I'm sure in college in South Bend had a version of exploration on that illustrious campus. Maybe he ran into our good friend Ted Robinson.
You're spilling the tea.
Yeah, exactly right. So let's bring on a dear friend. It's been really cool, Jim. Got to know Gerry DiNardo at Media Days, and then spent training camp with him in a bus traveling across the country from Oregon and LA and SC and UCLA to Washington, and then, of course, all across the Midwest. And he's just a gem of a man. He really is a beautiful soul, a wealth of knowledge, and so glad we have on today former national champion and All-American at Notre Dame to talk about Notre Dame playing Ohio State and much more. Of course, presented by our founding partner, 76. Here's our conversation with a great friend and a football legend, Gerry DiNardo. All right, as mentioned, here's one of my favorite people I've ever been around. In year one of the Big Ten, I've gotten to be around Gerry DiNardo, the coach from the beginning, and now here we are at the end of the season, Coach. You're a Notre Dame alum. You're a Notre Dame great, an All-American, and you're an all-everything at the Big Ten Network. So this is like a perfect setting for us right now, man. Thanks for the time.
Well, thanks for having me, Yogi. I can't believe it. I think Ashley says this all the time. I feel like I've known you guys all my life, and it's been a great ride meeting you guys, and I'm so glad the people at the Big Ten Network were smart enough to steal you and Ashley.
Oh, well, that means a lot. And it's true. I mean, I can imagine us being in Eugene, Oregon, like it was yesterday, going through the cold plunge at practice. And afterwards, you saying, this team looks like a team that can make a run. And they went undefeated all season. And then I can remember also watching you at Ohio State. And my vivid memory, Coach, is I swear Ryan Day came up to you maybe 10 times during practice. Hey, Coach, what do you think about this? Hey, Coach, what do you think about this? And it's so cool to watch you. So now here we sit. Oregon's out of it. Ohio State's in it, and they're playing your alma mater. Where's your heart at this week with the game that's upcoming on the 20th?
You know, Yogi, my work career has been interesting as far as rooting and being involved with your team. I recruited against Notre Dame when I was at Colorado. Not so much at Vanderbilt, but certainly when I was at LSU. And then obviously when I got into media, it was the Big Ten Network, and they're obviously not a member. So it's kept me from a lot of reunions. It's kept me from staying in touch with a lot of the players. Last season, we had the 50th reunion of our 73 national championship, and I had a chance to start visiting with some people. And so I'm always stuck in this position, right? And people say, who are you rooting for? I mean, what answer do they expect? I mean, this is a tough question and a tough answer. I mean, I love Ryan Day. I love Ohio State. I've gotten to know those people, and I love my schools. So, watching Ohio State and Notre Dame will certainly be interesting for me, and I'm hoping it's a great game.
What was it like last week? You were in Miami. You watched Penn State, Notre Dame. I watched you on the Big Ten Network afterwards. You guys did a phenomenal job on the set there with Matt Millen and Danny Rogers and company. But for you, what was that like being around your team in Notre Dame? I'd imagine for the first time on a football field for a game in 40 years, Coach?
Yeah, a few years back when we had tailgate at Ann Arbor, the tailgate show ended at noon. My daughter is a Notre Dame grad as well, and her and I had never been to a game together. So I did make that game. It was against Virginia a few years back. But last week's a little different, Yogi. I mean, obviously, I have feelings for Notre Dame. It was a great experience. I probably didn't deserve to be at that school in many different ways, but it was business, right? I mean, I was there to cover the game, not to root for a team or not to root against a team. It was an even match team. I think that Matt and I knew it was going to be a quarterback game. We knew it was going to be what offense could handle pressure, and that's kind of the way it unfolded. So the best memory of that game is what I predicted happened. That was more important for me than to root for Notre Dame or root for Penn State.
Yeah, that's really well said. If we could just kind of go back for a minute, because I grew up a Notre Dame fan. Like I had a signed picture of Ron Paulus on my wall as a child. Said, "Dear Yogi, best wishes, Ron Paulus," because he grew up in Pennsylvania near where I grew up. You played for an all-time great in Ara Parseghian, as you referenced off the top of the show here. What do you recall about when you look back, like how it made that era so special, and how your team in '73 was able to win a national championship?
Well, first it starts with Ara, ahead of his time. Vietnam War was kind of just ending, and the protests had calmed down. But he said to us, "You can protest, no damage, no violence." This is the days of Woody Hayes and Bear Bryant, and we would have events. I can remember one event in Indianapolis where we sat at the dais and I was actually having a drink with Ara, and I'm on the team. I mean, he was a guy who wasn't a grinder. He understood our generation more than I have to believe any other coach. Like I said, this is Bear Bryant, Bo Schembechler, Woody Hayes. He was nothing like those guys. I mean, you wanted to be around him. It may be one of the best ways to say it. I'm not sure everybody wanted to be around their coach back in that day. I think it's more like that now than it's ever been. But to be with him and play in his last game, I don't know how lucky I could be.
Yeah, what a special run. I mean, there's such prestige around Notre Dame in a different way than there is prestige around Ohio State, and I just think it's kind of unique as we watch these two teams find themselves in the national championship game. For you in Ohio State, you've been at the Big Ten Network since its launch. We're talking 18 years ago, nearly 20 years ago. How have you watched and learned about Ohio State? And then as we sit here today and what they've gone through with whether it's the highest paid roster, whether it's the highest expectations of a team in the preseason, how have you watched this program navigate over nearly 2 decades? And then I'd be curious about how it's navigated this year, in your opinion.
Yogi, I can connect your question now with the previous questions about Notre Dame. I can remember as a student athlete, now this is back in the day, right? This is Woody Hayes at Ohio State. This is Oklahoma on a run. We as a team, not a whole team, but with the few friends that you had, your close friends, we'd watch those games and say, we don't have half the talent those two teams have. And we're glad we're not playing Ohio State. We're glad we're not playing Oklahoma. And this was obviously back in the day. The one thing about Ohio State is they've always had the best players in the country, or in that conversation. And so when we started the network, it was Jim Tressel, who was just great, just a great person. And he treated the Big Ten Network just with incredible grace. and then obviously we covered Urban, and now he's working with us. But Ohio State's always been a team that has had as good of players as anybody in the country, and it's always been they should be in the national championship hunt. What I did learn that I didn't know until the Big Ten Network is this narrative that the Ohio State fans would rather be 1-11 and beat Michigan than be 11-1, win a championship, and lose to Michigan. And I find that mind-boggling. I find that counterproductive. I find that putting the pressure that Ryan Day feels. And now the narrative is, to take it full circle, is if they win the national championship, it'll be with an asterisk. That's what the fans were telling me when I was in Columbus, when I was at the Tennessee-Ohio State game. I would interact with the fans, and they would say, yeah, we might win the national championship, but we still didn't beat Michigan. And so, and I had friends, still have friends at the network that feel that way about Ohio State. They'd rather be 1-11 than 11-1 and beat Michigan. I guess that's never changed, I guess. But that's something I've never been around before.
Yeah, I'll be so curious how that thing plays out this year. Like, for me, what's been so unique, I'd be curious if you'd agree, watching them in camp with you, as I referenced, it was the only team that I could compare to the team when I was at SC with Pete Carroll on, that I was like, okay, this looks like 2005. Like, this is loaded. And then as the season played out, I kept watching them, and I was like, God, they just seem tight. You know, you look at the Purdue game, 0-0 after one. Northwestern, 7-0 after one. You're just looking in November, and you're like, God, something's up. And then the Michigan game you referenced. And I was so curious if this team was going to play free, play with a childlike joy that you played with. Maybe you referenced a version of that with your time at Notre Dame. That was definitely the case when I was at SC. And then I think we've seen that. And I was so curious on what would happen if they were down. What would happen when adversity struck? And that's what I was kind of hoping for, being at the Cotton Bowl over the weekend. And it happened. And they came back and didn't flinch. And to me, it was like a big growth for them to be like, okay, I think this team knows how to navigate all of the pressure and expectation that comes with wearing that uniform. I'm curious if you see it that way, and if you see this team playing their best and being able to navigate adversity when it comes up in a different way in the postseason, maybe than when they did in the regular season.
Yeah, I think the Michigan loss made them desperate for success. They decided not to go to the NFL. This season was all about finally beating Michigan and playing for the national championship. When they lose to Michigan, especially when they lose in the style that they lost, they come out of the Michigan game, and because of the 12-team playoff, they still had a chance to achieve a national championship. They lost the Michigan thing. I actually think it's a great lesson for the fans. Not that the fans are going to learn a lesson, but the team learned a lesson that we wanted to beat Michigan in the worst way. Nobody had gold pants, and the players would talk about gold pants. And yet they were overlooking perhaps the bigger prize. So without the loss to Michigan, I'm not sure they're in the championship game, okay? Because I think they thought beating Michigan was going to be automatic this year. First of all, Michigan wasn't that good. Second of all, we came back to beat them, so of course we're going to beat them because that's why we came back. And they're not any good. And so they came out of it with a desperate motivation. So they're where they are right now because of the Michigan loss, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's really well said. It was cool being at the Rose Bowl this year. I was around a good friend of yours in Urban Meyer, and he said to me something that really struck a chord. He goes, Gerry DiNardo is one of my best friends in the world. I'd do anything for that guy. You know how to develop relationships as well as anybody. I'm curious for you if you could take us inside the world of coaching. Because I think people think that coaches are supposed to not like each other. And here we have Marcus Freeman, who played at Ohio State and coached at Ohio State, and Ryan Day. They're not exactly the same age, but the same generation of coaches. Share with us like the coaching world and how coaches can try to win and compete against one another at the most premium of levels, but also be buddies and connect and communicate off the field or in the off season like you have.
Yeah, I don't think it happens all that often. For me, it happened with Lloyd Carr. Lloyd and I still, we speak weekly right now. So when I was at Indiana, obviously we competed with them, but the relationship really developed when I was at Eastern Michigan, and then I became the head coach of Vanderbilt, and I always was doing something with the Michigan summer camp, because back in the day, that's really some of the recruiting that you did. So, other than Lloyd, Gary Barnett and I were on the same staff, so so we would compare notes and do some things. So it doesn't happen often, but the value of it, as your question indicates, is you're talking to someone else who's in the same shoes as you are, and that's hard to do. If we were better when I was at Indiana, I'm not sure Lloyd and I would have spoken all that much. If I wasn't at Vanderbilt, I know we could say anything to one another, because obviously we weren't playing against one another. And then LSU, when I was at LSU, that's when Gary Moeller stepped down and Lloyd became the head coach, and we talked a lot about him taking the job. He asked me if I was interested in it, because he didn't know if he was going to get it, he was going to speak for me, and so on and so forth. So it doesn't happen often. My experience is Lloyd and Gary, probably the two closest. That Jim Caldwell to a certain extent for a while.
That's cool. That's cool. There's so many common bonds in a unique way. You and I are going to have a common bond on Monday, the national championship game. We're going to be sitting next to each other talking about this ball game. How do you see this shaking out? I know we're a little less than a week away from this one, but you nailed your prediction in the Orange Bowl. I'm curious where your head's at on this one right now.
Well, Ohio State certainly is the more talented team, but not a big enough gap that it means they're going to automatically win the game. I think the spread, I think it's 8. I think that's probably right on. I think they're probably a touchdown more talented. I think the matchup is favorable for Ohio State when Notre Dame has the ball. They've got 2 offensive linemen that are banged up. One's certainly not going to play. One may play. Just like the Penn State game, Notre Dame had to handle the defensive pressure. I think they're going to have to do the same thing. I think the bigger difference is I think that Ohio State has a better 4-man pressure than Penn State does, although with Abdul Carter, I could be wrong there. How do you talk about a big game without talking about the quarterbacks? I think the quarterbacks are pretty similar. They're veteran guys. They're talented, but not over-talented. They can't be crazy good in the game. They have to play within their system. I think, Leonard is carrying the ball more than the tailbacks, which is an incredible stat. I mean, in all 3 playoff games, he's carried the ball more than any one tailback. But it's really not the number with him. It's really more short yardage, scrambles, those type of things. Howard, he's just on a roll right now, and he's got tremendous support. Interesting to me, I was just reading my notes before we got on. Did Smith have 1 catch in the Texas game?
Yeah.
So what did they do? Do they unlock the safe for Notre Dame to do the same thing? Because no one else has been able to hold him to 1 catch. And so I see the matchup similar to the Notre Dame Penn State matchup, except Ohio State is more talented than Penn State.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, to your point, the quarterback thing, because each quarterback has been there for just about a calendar year,
right,
which I think is just so unique with like the prestige of these schools. These guys have been embedded within the historic colors of their university, and they've only been there for a season. So I just think it's kind of unique where we sit in college football. Before we cut you loose, Coach, you spent 9 years at Colorado. The sport lost Bill McCartney last week. I know he had an influence on you. Can you share some of the things that you continue to lean on today from the lessons learned from back in the day?
Yeah, I'd say this, Yogi. You learned how to be a head coach under Bill McCartney. You learned how to motivate, both individually and in front of a team. You learned how to recruit. I mean, the acquisition of talent. I mean, Eric Bieniemy, Darian Hagan, Alfred Williams, Canavis. I mean, it was unbelievable how we recruited. I mean, it's changed some, but just an example. So when we were just starting to get good, we started to get into better and it's progressive. I mean, I could talk for this for hours. You're recruiting against your peers on the field. So when we first got there, we were recruiting with the bottom half of the Big Eight. That's who was interested. As we were getting ready to go from the bottom to the middle, from the middle to the top, now we're in homes in Los Angeles. Guys are visiting USC. So we had to change our pitch. And we were in one home once, and we were recruiting the tailback. And Matt's on the couch, and I'm sitting next to him. He's talking to the prospect and the parents. And he gets up, and he goes into the kitchen, and he brings out the kitchen chairs. And he puts them one behind another. He said, if you go to USC, this is how many tailbacks are going to be ahead of you. All these chairs, the 6 dining room chairs, you're going to be number 6. I mean, just in crazy intuitiveness. I can remember when I first got with him, when we first got there, we went into a home in Detroit, and Mom asked if we wanted coffee. I said no. He said yes. We get in the car. You don't ever turn down coffee. You insulted that woman. Another time we're in Detroit, and I was there first, so I picked him up at the airport. I'm driving a foreign car. He says, "What are you doing? We can't drive this car in Detroit." He grew up in Detroit. I mean, it was Motor City to him. But those are just 2 silly examples. But the acquisition of talent. I mean, he was a great recruiter, and we did all kinds of things that you could call crazy stuff. We didn't break the rules, but every gadget we could use in recruiting, every Operation Maxi Bump, the whole staff went and visited one prospect, and we said, these 9 coaches could be all over the country, but you are so important to us that the whole staff is in your home. How could you say? I mean, just creative things. And he could motivate his team. And, he was a defensive guy, so we struggled offensively sometimes with what we wanted to do and all that. I just can't say. You learn how to be a head coach. Yeah. I took everything I learned there, just used my personality that was different than Bill's. And, I owe it all to him.
Well, you're our head coach at the Big Ten Network. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask. And Coach, the only role I have on the show is to ask a question I don't know the answer to. And I talk to a lot of young head coaches in where I sit today, and a lot of them talk about going hard and then getting out and doing media. You had that before your time. You had that thought. You shut it down before you turned 50. You own your restaurant. You get into TV. You're still doing it. Curious as you reflect back now, and here we sit at the national championship as the final game of this illustrious season. Like, do you wish you were still coaching? Do you love that you made that choice that you made back then? I'm curious how you look at the last 20-ish years.
Yeah, I do. I wish I was still coaching because I made some decisions that I wish I hadn't made. Okay, so my plan was to coach, then to do the restaurant and do the media. So that worked. I think if I could do it over again, I would have gone longer. When I got fired at LSU, McNeese State offered me a job. Very good job on that level. Very good job. And the XFL offered me the Birmingham franchise. I took the Birmingham franchise. I probably, if I would have gone to McNeese, I probably could have recycled myself back to a big school. So here's how I sum up my career. We did a good job at Vanderbilt. We did a good job at LSU for the first 3 years, won 3 bowl games. They had never done that. We took over a program that lost 6 straight years. But I made bad decisions in the 4th and the 5th year. Losing an LSU job is 100% my fault. Because when you're the head coach at LSU, you have enough power if you're winning games that no chancellor, no president, no AD can fire you. And I lost that power. I had it the first 3 years. You're going to be the AD when you're done. You can run for governor. I went through that whole thing that they do to you at LSU, and then I screwed it up. At Indiana, I had 3 ADs, 3 presidents, and 6 mission statements. So that one, I think I had some shared fault. But I often think about that McNeese job could have changed the direction of my career. So I did everything. The problem with it, Yogi, is there's nothing better in the world than coaching. So when you say to someone, "Do you wish you were still coaching?" It's an experience that you can't duplicate. You're with young people. You're on campus. And these athletes nowadays, I defend them to the hilt because all the people my age, oh, they're getting paid now, oh, they can transfer and all this stuff. These are the most highly motivated, most dedicated. They study the game year round. They don't go home in the summer. The transfer portal is the best thing that ever happened. I don't know that most people know this. The transfer portal rule only impacted 5 sports: football, men's and women's basketball, baseball, and hockey, because all other athletes could always transfer without penalty. So you're treating the football players like you've treated historically all the other athletes. So rather than knock these young people, I look out there at practice when I go to practice in the fall with you, and I see the greatest generation of athletes. And for someone my age or close to my age to think that we wanted to win more than they want is ignorance and arrogance and untrue. This is the greatest generation of athletes until the next greatest generation. They're doing 100 times more than we ever did.
I couldn't agree more. And look, if you want to come coach the next generation, I got 12 9-year-olds down the street that I'm flag football coach. You got a spot. You can take over the head job. You do whatever you want, okay? You're dialed, okay? You name it. We'll get you out to LA again. We loved having you in our backyard, right over my periphery right now. Okay, to that point, I know we want to end on this. You referenced Indiana. Our dear friend Rhett Lewis, his family, they are safe. They've had to evacuate. He's doing well. We check in with him every single day. So I know we both love him and his family dearly. His wife's doing a phenomenal job reporting on ABC. He's doing a phenomenal job navigating fatherhood, husband, NFL, playoffs, the whole 9 yards. And I just know how much Rhett means to both of us.
Yeah, and he was a great player, a great teammate. You know, he was an integral part of what we were trying to do at Indiana. I don't think he has a ceiling in media. I think he can go and do whatever he wants to do. I'm glad you mentioned him. I feel terrible. I haven't contacted him, but now that you mentioned him, I certainly will.
Yeah, no, he's in it right now, and lots of love to him. And I'm with you. I think he's, no offense to Guy Haberman or Ashley or you or anybody, but I think he's the most talented guy I've ever worked with because he can do literally everything. You are going to do everything. You'll be covering this game every which way. Cannot wait to sit next to you in like the room when we watch the game. And then, of course, on set so other people can hopefully watch us. That'll be all over the Big Ten Network. Coach will be there all weekend through the game Monday. I'll be there Monday, Coach. Thank you so much for the time. I love you dearly. You've been such an integral part, and you're right. I feel like I've known you my entire life, and we've only been together for one season. So thanks again.
Well, thanks for having me, Yogi. This has been a blast. And like we say in the green room, let's kill it Monday. Let's kill it.
Let's kill it, dog. All right. There it is. Coach Gerry DiNardo.
Thanks, Yogi.
It's the Afterglow. Yogi Roth, Jim Thornby. That was Coach Gerry DiNardo, presented by our founding partner, 76, keeping you in the know on the go, go, go. So we've got a little less than a week before we all get going around this national championship game. Jim, I know you're excited about this guest. You did a lot of research preparing for Coach DiNardo. What's your takeaway? Do you wish we dove into a topic that maybe we didn't find time for?
No, we could have gone 2 hours, and
Rudy, we could have got.
We still, there's so much meat left on that bone, so we're good for another run there. But I thought the coolest one point that came up from your question was talking about the relationship with coaches and the friendship he developed with Lloyd Carr, and then how he talked about his relationship with Coach Mack at Colorado. And I think the thing that he really kind of when you asked the question and then he responded in the way that made sense to me is that you can see why some coaches don't get along because they are such competitive people and whatever. But to his point, no one else can really understand their life like another head coach. No one can relate to them on that level. It's not just a regular job. You know, you have all these things that you have to accomplish and all the different the things that are not just on the field and off the field and all the rest of the stuff. No one understands that like another head coach. So if you can find someone on that level that you have a mutual respect for, and then you can just kind of have that vibe. I get it, like why you can have a relationship like that, because it's so hard to find someone that can relate to your mentality of the things that you have to give up in order to do that job. Whether it's how, he talked about, the Notre Dame of, he finally got to go to the reunion for the 50th, and being able to have that moment, like that. There's so many things that he gave up in order to live this life. So to have someone that can also understand that lifestyle is unique.
Yeah, I think a few things really stood out to me. One was what he referenced with Lloyd Carr. Like, he goes, if we weren't better, would we have been?
Right.
Like basically saying, like, if our team was competing for Big Ten championships, would he and I become the friends that we are? Of course, he probably wished that they were better as a team and they won more games, but I think he also has such a beautiful perspective on life that he just adores the friendships he had. I mean, I swear, I see with Urban Meyer, I watch they do a segment called Urban Analysis. You can find it on YouTube or the Big Ten Network. It's really cool. I watch it every week. And to hear the detail from Urban about how it came to be. And when he flies in on Saturday night, he goes, he always has a seat for me at a restaurant. And we got the games on multiple TVs and we're sketching out what we're going to talk about the next day. Like, I think as you go through life, it's like what we have done. Like you really enjoy and yearn for connection, especially around shared experiences, right? Like, I get clowned by my wife pretty regularly, as do you, of like, hey, build a better community. And I'm like, cool, but it's very specific. I want like people who know sports, don't just love sports. I want, you know what I mean? Like, it's so lame, but it's true. Like, you want shared experience. And I think coaches at any level, it's why, like, right now the convention's going on, the coaches convention. I've talked to many people that are down there over the last couple of days. They go there for the shared experience. And I think that people can understand when you get hired or you get fired, or can you take somebody? And how many times have we heard the phrase, like, it's just part of the business? Like, I get it. We signed up for it. Like, there's also the beautiful side of that, of like the relationship side and growing together and watching your families evolve and the lessons learned. So that was really cool. And then I think I just got an absolute chuckle out of like, couldn't you imagine Bill McCartney being like, you always drink the coffee. You never turn down a coffee. Or like I could see it in Detroit. Like, you're serious right now? We're not driving like a Ford. What are you doing? Like, it was amazing, man. And that's, I think, also the part of CEOs and head coaches, like, to see through that. And I wasn't around him, obviously, anywhere near where Coach DiNardo was, but around Bill McCartney enough in our time at Colorado, covering them. I did it for Fox when they were in the Big 12, and then, of course, in the Pac-12. And he was always just so gracious, man. I mean, just a true legend. We haven't really had a chance to comment on it, but it was really cool to hear from someone who was tremendously impacted in a beautiful way by a guy who's impacted Colorado football, I'd argue, as much as anybody, right? Like, he won a national championship. I know what Deion has done there in the last couple of years has revitalized this massive school and this brand, et cetera. But Bill McCartney's, I think, always going to be the soul of Colorado football, at least for probably the remainder of our lifetimes. Okay, so before we punch out of here, we got another episode this week. We got good friend, I believe, Anthony Herron coming on. We're going to talk about the game, again, the national title game. We'll also talk a little bit of the news in college football. There's a bunch going on that we will get to in our next episode, whether it's coaching hires, coaching movement, projected movement. I'm going to give my take on why I think Pete Carroll should be in the NFL. Head coach with the Raiders, possibly. Interview is happening on Tuesday. Had an interview last week with the Bears. Maybe the Cowboys are now in play. You all know how much I love that man. Go listen to the episode. If you're a GM out there, you want to learn more about Pete, let's go back in the archives right here at Y Option. As always, thanks for the love. Way more importantly, let's continue to pour energy, support whatever you can. There's so many ways to support people in Southern California, whether it's $5 in a GoFundMe campaign, whether it's just sending out good energy, calling a friend, checking in. I know Jim and I will continue to do that here at Y Option, and I know you will as well. So until next time, hope you enjoy Coach Gerry DiNardo as much as we did. Lots of love, and talk soon. Peace.